How do you talk a Christian army, an army that has sworn a holy oath to march on Jerusalem, into turning its weapons instead on the largest, richest Christian city on earth? That is the riddle sitting at the dark heart of the Fourth Crusade. And the answer wears an unlikely face. He was blind. He was past 90 years old. And he may have been the most dangerous negotiator who ever lived. Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice, who took a holy war and bent it, step by patient step, until it fell upon the walls of Constantinople. To make sense of how that happened, you have to understand the city that produced him, because Venice was not like anywhere else in the world. It grew no crops of any importance. It had no farmland, no mines, barely any solid ground. A cluster of islands in a lagoon, held together by wooden piles driven into the mud. What Venice had was the sea and ships, and an absolute genius for trade. Its people were merchants first, and Christians a close second, and they had built the most formidable maritime power in the Mediterranean out of salt water and sheer nerve. At the head of that republic sat the Doge, Venice's elected ruler, a duke in everything but the crown. And in 1192, the men of Venice chose as their Doge a figure already old enough to be most of their grandfathers. Enrico Dandolo came from one of the city's great families. He had spent a lifetime in its service as a diplomat and a hard bargainer. And by the time the crown of the Doge came to him, he had lost his sight. How he lost it is a story in itself, and it's where history and legend start to wrestle. A long Venetian tradition says that decades earlier, on a diplomatic mission to Constantinople, the Byzantines themselves blinded him, a wound that would give him every reason to hate the city he later helped to ruin. It's a wonderful story. It is also, most likely, not true. The best modern research points to something quieter and sadder, a blow to the head in his younger years, and a slow fading of his sight over time. The sources can't even agree on exactly how old he was, but everyone agrees on the two things that matter. He could not see, and he missed nothing. The call that would change his life came from Rome. Pope Innocent III, young and fiercely determined, wanted to win back Jerusalem, and he had a clever plan for how to do it. Rather than throw another army at the well-defended Holy Land directly, this crusade would strike first at Egypt, the soft underbelly of Muslim power in the region, and use it as a stepping stone. There was just one problem. To attack Egypt, you needed to go by sea, and to go by sea, you needed ships, a great many ships, and only one place in Europe could build them fast enough. In the year 1201, a delegation of French knights came to Venice to make a deal. Among them, a nobleman who would later write down everything he saw, Geoffrey of Villehardouin. What Dandolo offered them was staggering. Venice would build an entire war fleet from nothing, transports for thousands of men and horses, plus 50 armed galleys of its own, and feed the whole army for a year. The price was 85,000 silver marks, a sum so vast it's hard to translate, plus an equal share of everything the Crusade conquered. And then Venice did something almost mad. It kept its word. For more than a year, the Republic essentially shut down. Its shipyards stopped all other work. Ordinary trade, the lifeblood of the city, was suspended so that every hand could build the fleet. Thousands of carpenters, rope makers, sail makers and smiths labored through the seasons in the great state shipyard, turning out one hull after another in a feat of organization that few places on earth could have matched. When it was finished, some 200 vessels rode at anchor in the lagoon, the largest fleet assembled in Europe in living memory. Venice had bet its entire economy on this crusade turning up and paying its bill. The crusade did not turn up, not all of it. When the knights had done their sums back in France, they had planned for an army of around 33,000. But crusaders are not employees. You cannot make them show up. Many took ship from other ports, some never came at all, and when the counting was done at Venice, perhaps a third of the expected army had actually arrived. A third of the men, owing the full price for all of them. They emptied their purses. The great lords gave up their own gold plate, and they were still enormously short, tens of thousands of marks short. There they sat, stranded on a sandy island called the Lido, just off the city, a proud army of holy warriors who had become, in effect, the worst-funded expedition in Christian history, unable to pay their ferryman and unable to go home. And their ferryman was a blind man in his 90s who held every card. Here's where I'll give you my honest opinion, and I know not everyone shares it. For centuries, people have argued about what happened next. One camp says Dandolo planned the whole diversion from the beginning, a cold Venetian plot to hijack a holy war for profit. The other camp says no, it was a cascade of accidents, one desperate decision forcing the next, and Dandolo simply played a terrible hand better than anyone alive. I fall firmly in the second camp. I don't think he schemed it, I think he surfed it, brilliantly and without mercy. If you're with me on that, throw the old man a like. And if you're convinced this was a plot from day one, I want to hear you make the case in the comments. Go on. Try to change my mind. Because whatever the truth, the next move was ugly. Dandolo had a solution to the debt, and it did not involve Egypt. Down the Adriatic coast lay the city of Zara, modern-day Zadar in Croatia, a wealthy port that had once belonged to Venice and had since broken away and put itself under the protection of the King of Hungary. Venice wanted it back. So the offer to the stranded crusaders was simple. Help us take Zara, and we'll suspend your debt until the plunder pays it off. There was a catch that should have stopped everyone cold. Zara was a Catholic city. Worse, the King of Hungary had himself taken the Crusaders' vow, which meant his lands were under the protection of the Church. An army raised to fight for Christ was being asked to lay siege to fellow Christians on the way. The Pope's position could not have been clearer. He expressly forbade it and warned of excommunication for anyone who took part. In November of 1202, they attacked Zara anyway. The city held out for a fortnight and then fell, and the victors wintered inside its walls. When the news reached Rome, Innocent III was appalled, and he did excommunicate the army, cutting them off, in the eyes of the Church, from salvation itself. It's a staggering thought. A crusade, blessed by the Pope, was now under the Pope's own curse, and it had not yet fought a single enemy of the faith. He would later soften it for the French, accepting that they had acted under pressure. But the road had bent, and it was about to bend much further. Into this mess walked a young man with a fortune to promise and not a coin to his name. His name was Alexios, and his story was tailor-made to tempt a broke and excommunicated army. His father had been Isaac II, emperor in Constantinople, until Isaac's own brother seized the throne, had him deposed and blinded, and locked him away, taking the crown as Alexios III. Young Alexios had slipped out of the empire and gone west, from court to court, looking for someone with an army who might put his family back on the throne. And now he found them, wintering in the ruins of Zara. His offer was almost obscene in its generosity. If the crusade would sail to Constantinople and restore his father and himself to power, he would pay them 200,000 silver marks, more than twice the sum that had bankrupted them at Venice. He would feed the army. He would add 10,000 of his own soldiers to the crusade. And, most tempting of all to the Pope's dream, he would bring the entire Eastern Orthodox Church back under the authority of Rome, healing a rift in Christianity that was already 150 years old. It sounded like the answer to every prayer. Pay off the debt, please the Pope, and heal the Church, all with one profitable detour. I suspect the more cynical men in that room could hear the promise for what it truly was, the wild pledge of a desperate exile who had no earthly way to deliver it. But desperate men make excellent listeners. The fleet turned east. When they came within sight of Constantinople in the summer of 1203, even these hardened warriors fell silent. Nothing in Western Europe had prepared them for it. This was the largest, wealthiest city in the Christian world, home to perhaps as many as 500,000 people at a time, when Paris and London were muddy towns of a few tens of thousands. Its land walls had held off every enemy for 800 years. Its churches glittered with gold and mosaic. At its very center stood the Hippodrome, a colossal racing arena ringed with ancient statues in bronze and marble hauled in over the centuries from every corner of the old Roman world. Among them, 4 great bronze horses that had watched the chariots thunder round for longer than anyone could remember, and that were, though no one yet knew it, about to make a very long journey west. Villehardouin wrote that men who saw the city could scarcely believe so rich and powerful a place could exist, and that many trembled at the sight, and I don't blame them. Taking it should have been impossible. The great walls that faced the land were untouchable. But Dandolo, the sailor, saw what the soldiers didn't. The weak seam was the seawall along the inlet, called the Golden Horn, lower and reachable from the water, where Venice was strongest. The Venetians lashed flying bridges to the masts of their ships and drove them straight against the ramparts. And here is the moment I cannot get out of my head. As the galleys hesitated under a storm of missiles from the walls, the old Doge, blind, past 90, in full armour, had himself brought to the very prow of his ship, the banner of St. Mark flying above him, and ordered his crew, on pain of his fury, to run the galley aground and put him ashore first. Shamed by their ancient, sightless leader standing exposed at the front, the Venetians surged forward and planted the banner on the wall. Picture giving that order. Blind, over 90, in armour, telling your own crew to drive your ship onto a defended shore or answer to you for it. I have turned that scene over and over, and I still cannot fully get inside his head. If you think you understand what makes a man do that, put it into words for me below. I will read everyone. The city cracked. The usurping emperor fled in the night. The old blind Isaac was pulled from his cell and set back on the throne, and his son was crowned beside him as Alexios IV. The Crusaders had done it. All they wanted now was to be paid and to sail onto the war they had actually signed up for. The money never came. Alexios IV climbed onto his throne and discovered what any Venetian could have told him. The treasury was empty, the promise impossible. His own people despised him for it, and despised him more for the arrogant foreign army camped outside their walls, and for the price he had offered them, submission to a Roman church they had rejected for generations. He squeezed the city for every coin he could, stripped ornaments from churches to melt them down, and it was never going to be enough. A great fire broke out and gutted whole districts, and the mood in the city curdled from resentment into fury. The end came from inside the palace. A well-connected nobleman, the Greeks nicknamed Murzuphlis, for his thick, gloomy, joined-up eyebrows, which tells you a little about Byzantine humour, seized power in a coup. The young emperor, who had promised the Crusaders the world, was thrown into a cell and did not survive it. His broken father did not last much longer. And the new man, Alexios V, made his position plain. The debts would not be honoured, and the Latins could do as they pleased. He began strengthening the walls for the reckoning everyone knew was coming. For the Crusaders and Venetians, this was the point of no return. They were excommunicated, unpaid, far from home, and now facing a hostile emperor in a city they had come to think of as owed to them. Their leaders and the clergy traveling with them reached a conclusion that still takes the breath away. They decided the Greeks were treacherous schismatics who had betrayed a sacred agreement, and that taking the city by force was therefore not a sin, but something close to a holy duty. With that comforting logic in place, they sat down and did something extraordinary. Before a single wall had fallen, they drew up a detailed treaty carving the whole Byzantine Empire into shares, which lord would receive which provinces, which ports, which islands, and how they would choose an emperor of their own from among themselves. They divided the bear's skin while the bear still breathed. In April of 1204, the assault came again from the water, and this time it did not stop at the wall. The defences gave way, Alexios V slipped out of the city, and Constantinople, the shield of Eastern Christendom, unconquered for 8 centuries, lay open to the men who had come, in theory, to defend the faith. What followed is one of the darkest episodes of the entire Middle Ages, and I am not going to dress it up. For 3 days, the greatest city in the Christian world was given over to plunder. The soldiers stripped it. They emptied the palaces and the great houses. They broke into the churches, prized the silver and gold from the altars, and hauled away by the cartload relics and treasures that had been gathered over 1,000 years. Even the mighty church of the Hagia Sophia, the beating heart of Orthodox faith, was ransacked. The Greek official Nikitas, who lived through it, left a lament so raw you can still feel the grief coming off the page. The sorrow of a man watching everything he loved and everything his people had built laid waste by fellow Christians. I have read a great deal of medieval history, and few passages have ever landed on me quite like his. Sit with the irony of it for a moment. A holy war called to recover Jerusalem never came within 1,000 miles of the Holy Land. Instead, its single greatest achievement was to overwhelm the largest Christian city on earth. Out of the wreckage, the conquerors built something new and shabby in its place: the Latin Empire of Constantinople, a Western regime planted on a Greek throne. They passed over Dandolo's rival, the Crusades' leader Boniface of Montferrat, and instead crowned Baldwin of Flanders as the first Latin emperor, an outcome that suited Venice nicely, because the real winner of the Fourth Crusade was never a person. It was a city, and that city was Venice. Dandolo secured for his republic the richest possible cut: ports, trading posts, and islands strung all the way across the eastern Mediterranean, the skeleton of a commercial empire that would make Venice a great power for centuries. The Doge of Venice would afterwards carry an almost comically grand new title, styling himself Lord of a quarter and half a quarter of the Roman Empire, and some of the plunder you can still stand in front of today. Those same 4 bronze horses from the Hippodrome were shipped home and mounted over the entrance of St. Mark's Basilica, where their copies still gaze out over the square. And they are not the only ghost of that week still standing in Venice. Tucked into a corner of the same basilica, easy to walk straight past, is a squat little group of 4 figures carved from deep purple stone. Roman emperors, prized out of Constantinople and cemented into the wall of St. Mark's, where they have huddled shoulder to shoulder for 8 centuries. Sacred relics that the city had guarded for 1,000 years were carried off and scattered into the churches of France, Germany, and Italy, and the loot of that single week quietly reshaped the treasuries of half of Europe. If you have ever stood in that piazza and admired those horses without knowing where they came from, now you do. As for the old man himself, he never went home. Enrico Dandolo was lost in Constantinople in 1205, at an age no one could quite count, and he was buried inside the Hagia Sophia, the very church his crusade had stripped bare. A worn marble marker bearing his name can still be found in its upper gallery to this day. I have stood beside it in that vast, echoing space and thought about the strangeness of a blind Venetian merchant lying at rest in the greatest church of the empire he helped bring down. The deepest wound of 1204, though, was not to any one man or building. It was to Byzantium itself. The empire was eventually restored by the Greeks in 1261, but it came back a shadow of what it had been, smaller, poorer, and never again strong enough to guard the frontier of Europe as it once had. Many historians draw a straight line from the fall of Constantinople in this year to its final fall, 2.5 centuries later in 1453, when the walls that the Crusaders had helped to weaken could no longer hold. And the rift between the Eastern and Western churches, which the whole scheme had promised to heal, was instead driven so deep that it has never truly closed. 800 years on, in 2001, Pope John Paul II felt moved to express his sorrow to the Orthodox for what had been done in that city. Some wounds take a very long time to speak of. I'm the voice behind Mystique History, and this is exactly the kind of tale I can't leave alone. A story where a blind old man, a broken promise, and a mountain of debt did more damage than 100 armies ever managed. If it gripped you, stay a while and subscribe, and then tell me down below, whose forgotten story, which lost corner of the past, do you want me to walk into with you next? He could not see the city, but he saw exactly how it would fall, and in the end, it was Venice that rose.